Hi everybody, I'm Nate Eaton, and here in our studio today, you might recognize this guy if you're a local from years ago on KIFI, not too many years ago, mid-90s, right?
About 30 years ago.
30 years ago, can't believe it. This is Peter Young, who did the sports on weekends and then moved along in a television career. And what many people didn't know, what you probably didn't know, is that he was involved in a cult. And he's written a book about it called Stop the Man, Save the Tiger. So that's pretty crazy to hear that you're on the news, you know, presenting the headlines to people every night. You look put together, you look normal. You're not what somebody would think of as being a member of a cult.
Right.
Why don't we just go back to the beginning, Peter? Tell me how you got introduced to this.
Sure. You know, there's a million different ways to get into a cult. Nobody ever plans on joining a cult. I certainly didn't. I married into it. So I married into the cult when I married the love of my life. Met her when I was at Channel 8, 1996. Got married about 9 months later, and she had this Uncle Robert, who wasn't related to her or anybody else in her family. And she was born into it. So this Uncle Robert met my former in-laws at a small seminary in the 70s. And he kind of started this very parasitic, controlling, unhealthy relationship. My wife was born into it. So it's the only really life she knew, where he was the expert on everything. So then we met, and I heard all about this guy. You know, I met him before we got engaged because I needed to meet this guy because I knew that he had such an important role in her life. He would have a role in my life. And I met him at first. He was kind of quirky and odd, but you know, obviously I misread him. I didn't realize how dangerous he was. So we got married, 5 kids, but slowly and surely over time, he took over our lives to the point where my whole family, my in-laws, and including me for a couple of years, were completely brainwashed. You know, fast forwarding over 20 years now, destroyed my marriage, destroyed my family. I recovered from all this. The Lord opened my eyes and ears to the truth. So I wrote the book, and I do things like this to, largely spread awareness that cults are real. They're out there.
So when you were dating, she'd talk about him, like just how, what'd she say? Like, this guy's amazing, he's close to God, or what type of stuff?
So I remember before I even met her, there was a friend of mine in Pocatello who said, well, she's got this really weird family guru. So then on our first date, she brought up this Uncle Robert. And then she would talk about him in very glowing terms, like he was the expert on everything. No matter what the topic was, she would take her cues and what to believe from him. So it sounded very unhealthy to me at first. Like, I never met the guy, but hearing her talk about him just did not sound healthy to me. Again, I had no idea, nor would I have classified this as a cult. It was only much years later that I could look back and realize it was.
So how would you describe a cult?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't know if there's really one definition that everybody would agree upon. I'll tell you what I believe a cult is. I believe all cults have 2 things in common. Now, they come in all different shapes and sizes. The 2 things they have in common is, number 1, you have a leader, and then number 2, its foundation, at its core, is undue mind control. So manipulative, coercive mind control. And then from there, cults can kind of spread out. Some are physically abusive or sexually abusive, which ours was not, thankfully, but a lot of emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. And then it all kind of really flows out of the cult leader and I guess what their goals are, or how they want to be, let's say, looked upon or satisfied as they're leading this small group of people.
Would he, so you get married, newlyweds, would he, start coming over? Would he hold meetings? Like, how did it all begin?
Yeah. So he lived in Southern California, believe it or not.
Okay.
We lived most of these years in Idaho and Montana, and we would have what are called conferences. So our conferences were basically a glorified way of saying we would go to my in-laws' home in northern Idaho, in Hayden, just outside of Coeur d'Alene, and Uncle Robert, whose real name is Robert Booty, he would come and we would kind of sit semicircle around him in the living room. And he would talk for days on end, for hours at a time. And it was quite bizarre, the stuff that he shared.
Religious stuff?
Yeah, mostly religious stuff, some political, but mostly religious. And I remember being the one person in the room, I would kind of look around and think, here's my wife that I adore. Like, are you hearing this? Do you really believe this? Like, you're following this guy? Same thing with my in-laws. And I would be the one that would ask a lot of these questions. And you're not supposed to ask questions of the cult leader. But, with the advent of cell phones, then my wife would call him all the time. I eventually did. And we would just get on the cell phone with him for hours at a time as well when he was in California.
Just asking him like for guidance, for advice?
On everything, on absolutely everything. So, funny story, I just met my in-laws. So we had started dating. About a month later, go up to Coeur d'Alene, and I go down the hall to use the bathroom. And I'm a guy, so I stand up. And I go to the bathroom. When I come out, my father-in-law is standing right there outside the door. And obviously he was listening. He says, in our house, we sit down to pee. And I'm kind of like, wow, this is really weird, right? Like I just met the guy. It's really uncomfortable. He was standing really close to me. And he said, Uncle Robert taught me that because it'll splash. So that we sit down to pee, we don't stand because it's messy. Uncle Robert taught me that. And that's the first time I heard that phrase. And I would hear Uncle Robert taught me that countless times over the next 20 years. So when it came to something as minute and as personal as how you go to the bathroom, to everything else in life, he was the expert, he was the voice of reason, and you were not allowed to question him.
Did you ever feel that he was trying to manipulate you, trying to manipulate everybody in the group, trying to, tell you no to certain things? You can do this, but don't do that.
Well, the best way to answer that is yes, 100% of the time. That's what a cult leader does. So cult leaders are very manipulative, controlling. They make all the rules, but the rules don't apply to them. So in everything, he was manipulating us. And it was a pattern, it was on purpose. So if I ever had a question, like he had a lot of crazy ideas. For instance, I'll give you one of them. To him, all of recorded history was a struggle between the Jews and the Christians. And every recession, depression, war, plane crash was a Jewish conspiracy, everything. And so then I would ask the question, well, where's the proof of this? And the answer was never, well, here's the proof, or I'll give you an answer to your question, Peter. It was, Peter, why are you so stupid that you don't understand me? So he would always throw it back on me. That's one example. But when you ask if he's manipulative, it was more along the lines of, was he ever not manipulative?
How many people were in the group?
It was very small. It would have been my family, so I had 5 kids, my wife and I, then the in-laws, and then one of her brothers. And there was another guy named Brother Michael, and there was another guy named Gary. So I'd say at the most, probably about 15 people.
All family, all relatives?
Not everybody. Almost everybody was, though. And then Robert, again, was not related to any of us, so it would have been his wife as well.
Yeah. And talk about his personality. Was he charismatic? Was he attractive? Yeah. Was he compelling?
That's a good question. Was he charismatic? Yes. Was he compelling? Yeah. He was very interesting. Short guy, about, like I'm 6'5", right? So that's where the book title comes from, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. It was about an important dream that my ex-wife had, and he interpreted it, used it to solidify his control over her. He was about 5'6", maybe, a bald head, portly, olive skin. He was born and raised in Syria, jet black hair. He kind of dressed a little oddly. Could never be in a room with you or me or somebody else and just join in a give and take conversation, ever. He had to control the conversation all the time. So if you were ever in, let's say like a dinner gathering where there's like 10 or a dozen people, it would drive him nuts because he had to be able to control the conversation all the time. And eventually he would. And he would take over and dominate the conversation.
The question a lot of people have with these is you can maybe understand if the person's attractive, right, if the person is just a phenomenal speaker, makes you feel really good. Right. So what was the attraction? I mean, what was the appeal?
I have no idea. So, the first start of this would have been, again, my in-laws in the early 70s. I didn't know who they were at the time. I grew up in New Jersey. And whatever attracted them to Robert, I have no idea. But again, so my wife really wasn't given a chance growing up. All throughout her upbringing, her parents would constantly be referring to Uncle Robert, who lived a long way away, but he would come and visit. So for me, there really wasn't not much of an attraction. What led me to really believe him and listen to him was more along the lines of, going along to get along. My wife adored him and revered him. And I loved my wife, and I was trying to save my marriage. So in that regard, I was kind of the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water. The water just kept getting hotter and hotter, and I eventually boiled, if you continue the analogy. Really, I think the best way to put it would be like I kind of eroded and got worn out. Because for years, I was constantly hearing how stupid I was. Why didn't I understand it? Why didn't I just believe him? He's brilliant. Why do you ask these questions? And I would hear that from him and my wife. And eventually thought, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm wrong, which I wasn't.
What was his motivation? Because you said there wasn't anything sexual.
Right.
Was it money?
That's a good question. And I don't know if it was money. I can tell you another story. He taught that casinos were the true churches in America. And then he would call casinos his office. So the idea was that anybody could go into a casino, and regardless of their professional background or their bank account or whatever, the Lord could bless them at the casino. Okay, but I don't see people worshiping the Lord at the casino. Right. I see them worshiping money, right? And so then we would all tithe to him. So, tithing's in the Christian faith. We send him a portion of our money. And I remember describing this to a friend of mine after all this happened. And she said, wait a minute, Peter, you guys sent him money every month and he went to the casino all the time? And I said, yeah, when you put it like that, it doesn't sound very good, does it?
Right.
Now, he wouldn't have been getting rich off of us, but that was certainly an element of his control. I believe it takes a very special person when you have a lot of followers that are constantly showering you with this love and affection and telling you, my Nate, you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. You're amazing. It takes a special person to say, well, no, that's not me. I'm not your savior. I'm not perfect. And Robert was not perfect, and I believe, enjoyed that. He loved the attention and loved the adulation, as I believe most cult leaders do. They live and breathe for that.
Did it progress with him? Become more and more serious, more and more controlling? And is that what ultimately led you to getting out?
Yeah, and there's no question. So for the first few years of our marriage, this is late 90s, early 2000s, I thought we had the best marriage on earth. I loved my wife. I thought she loved me. I thought we were raising the bar of old time for, what a husband and wife in the marriage should look like. And I think, coincidentally, we didn't have as much contact with him at that time as we did later on. She would talk to him a lot on the phone. And then the control did increase. There's no question about it as the years went on. We were together for about 20 years. But interesting that today's 9/11. I can tell you the first time I really saw and understood that there was an evil element to him would have been about a year or so after 9/11. And I grew up in New Jersey, so northeast New Jersey. And so a lot of people from my town would commute into the city and work in the Twin Towers. And so on that day, I had high school friends that got out of the building alive, but they were in the buildings. I had a high school friend who was widowed that day. And so today, the 24th anniversary. So I think about this moment. It was about a year after 9/11. We were at one of our conferences. And it was a very dark moment for me because Robert was talking, we were talking about 9/11, and he kind of almost spat the words out that President Roosevelt was a Jew and Truman was a Jew, and they were behind all of this, of course, and 80,000 people died on 9/11. And I remember thinking, holy smokes, this guy's not just eccentric and odd, he's dangerous and evil. And I remember telling my wife that night, right before we went to bed, I told her what he'd said, and I said, I don't think we should have anything to do with this guy. Like, I was unnerved by what he had said. Shooken up, almost scared. And I thought, this is bad news. We should have nothing to do with him. And I never pressed the issue. I never, demanded that she, cut ties with him. Hindsight 2020, looking back, she might have left me then. I don't know. But there were a lot of moments along the way where I could look back and think, well, what if I had taken a stand here? What if I had put my foot down here? What if I had said no here? And I don't know what would have happened, but I do know what did happen was that control increased.
When you're doing the news, you're at TV, and a lot of times you go to small cities for 2 or 3 years and then jump to bigger cities. Is that what you're doing? You're moving around, but you're still keeping in touch with him?
So we did not move around that much. So when I was at Channel 8 for 2 years, like you said, you do your 2-year contract. I almost got a job in Reno. I didn't get it. And then I kind of got my dream job. I was working for OLM, the Outdoor Life Network, traveled the world covering sports like lumberjack and rodeo and skiing and speed skating, did the Olympic trials a couple times. And then my career kind of took a nosedive. So I was not hopping around from market to market. We lived in Southeast Idaho.
So you stayed here?
Stayed here, yeah. And then in 2009, we moved up to the Bozeman, Montana area to be able to send our kids to a private school. And another crazy Robert Booty story was that he must have watched some scary Discovery Channel video on the Yellowstone caldera and was absolutely certain the Yellowstone volcano was going to explode and we were going to be obliterated and we needed to leave Idaho. And we had bought land in Fremont County outside of Ashton. Teton views right above the Snake River, and we were going to build a beautiful log home there. This is about 07, 08. And because Uncle Robert said, well, we need to move, my wife was adamant. We needed to get out of Idaho because the Yellowstone volcano was going to explode. So that's another example that gives you of the control that he had. He had no idea, nor does anybody, what's going to happen. But one word out of his mouth, and my wife and my in-laws, would kind of look at me like, why are you endangering our family? Uncle Robert said, Yellowstone's going to blow, we need to move.
So did you move?
We did move. Not for that reason, but we did move. But I guarantee in the back of my mind, my wife, was pleased that we got out of Fremont County, Idaho.
So around 07, 08, you're kind of thinking in your mind, becoming disenfranchised with this man.
Yep.
But she's still full on in.
Yep.
You end up moving,
Yep.
and ultimately what leads to you completely distancing yourself from him and your wife?
Well, a lot of times people will escape a cult. In my situation, it was almost the reverse. So let's say about 15, 17 years in, again, I finally just kind of got worn out and thought, well, maybe it's me. Maybe he's been right all these years and I was wrong. And so then I kind of caved and I was all in. I would have been brainwashed for about 2.5 years. This would have been maybe 2015 to 2018. And, I was distraught. I was wrong. Uncle Robert's right. How could I have been so wicked? On and on and on. And, but it was never enough. So I was never really pure enough, never devoted enough to him. So then when she left in January 2017, it was really to draw closer to him. So then immediately after she left me and left the marriage, she and Robert went on a very vicious campaign of parental alienation, which is where one parent tries to alienate the kids from the other parent. So then they taught all of our children that I was the devil, that I was Satan, that I was a sorcerer, a liar, an abuser, an alien, a coward, a fraud, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, and even in court documents as well, she said all these things. And Robert would have orchestrated all of this. And children, they were young at the time. They believe what their parents tell them. So they all believed their mother. They were taught that the 5th commandment of the Bible, honor your father and mother, didn't apply to fathers who don't love the mother. So they literally thought that commandment didn't apply to me. That's what they were taught. Now, one of the wicked twists in all of this, go back about 2 years, Robert had 2 sons and he had granddaughters, but he had no grandsons. We had 5 children at the time. And for my wife, she thought this was an absolute travesty. There's no way that Robert's seed, Robert's bloodline, would end after his sons. He needed a grandson. So then she approached me and wanted to be a surrogate and provided Robert with a male grandson. Of course, I'm repulsed by this idea. And she was adamant that she wanted to do it, to be able to, through in vitro fertilization with one of his sons, provide a grandson. And I thought, well, what happens if you have a daughter? What happens if you have 2 daughters? You're going to keep doing this? She said, yes. I was repulsed by this, and thankfully it didn't happen. And then 2 years later, through this parental alienation, they started teaching our children that I was nothing more than a bloodline and a sperm donor, that I wasn't really a true father, because a father is so much more than what I was. So being called a sperm donor and just a bloodline was a pejorative to denigrate me. And yet 2 years earlier, Uncle Robert's bloodline was precious and had to be saved at all costs. That just shows you the depth of the brainwashing that my ex-wife went through. And really, when you read my book or you hear this, it's very easy to think, boy, this woman was real awful. She did some awful things, but she's really a victim as well.
Is she still involved?
As far as I know, yeah. And based on her actions and the way she communicates with me, what she's done to one of our children, there's no question that she's under his sway.
So it's called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. You mentioned a minute ago because you're a tall guy. You're referring to him as the tiger.
Yes. So that all goes back to, again, the fascinating story. Literally, Nate, every time I tell the story, I get goosebumps. Can God speak to us in dreams? I don't know. He's God. He can do whatever he wants, right? About a month or 2 before I met my future wife, she had a dream. Very important one. So important that she wrote a letter about it, sent it to Uncle Robert. He then read her letter and sent her back a 23-page reply. This bizarre letter. And this would have been, again, right before she met me. And in the dream, she's in a house where there's a tiger trying to kill her. If the tiger finds her, it's going to kill her. And the tiger represents a lot of things that she values: respect and strength and honor and dignity, et cetera, et cetera. So she wants to know where the tiger is, control it, but not kill it. And then the door of the house opens and a tall man walks in. But she can't see the face of the tall man. So at the time she was dating a guy, that guy disappears, she hides underneath the stairs and is worried and afraid for the tiger, because here comes the tall man. So in the dream, in the letter, Uncle Robert then basically manipulated it, and here his interpretation was, and I call her Paige in my book, Paige, this just shows that the tiger is your ego, it's your mind, you're not saved, you're not a Christian, and and wonders who is this tall man in your life, and tries to pawn himself off as the tall man, even though he's a really short guy. And I remember being shown this letter right when we started dating, about a month after I started dating her, and thinking, this is the weirdest letter I've ever read in my life. I mean, it is bizarre. Now I look back after about 25, 30 years, in the dream, the current boyfriend leaves. I met him once, and then we never saw him again. And, in the dream, Paige is concerned for the tiger because here comes the tall man. And really, she spent much of our marriage trying to protect and save that tiger, who I believe is this Uncle Robert character in her life. And I believe the Lord gave her that dream as a warning to say, this guy's not who you think he is. And for whatever reason, I did not understand that at the time. And I really failed in protecting my marriage and protecting my children from this guy, from the tiger. So in that regard, it is a bit of a tragedy. But in the end, I've learned a lot. I was rescued from a cult. Out of my 5 kids, it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of how they are doing. But several of them do really see it now. And they too have been rescued.
And when you say rescued, you mean physically rescued, or you came to your senses, or
a bit of both. Again, we did not live in a commune.
Right.
We weren't all together in one unit. Again, I don't think there was any sexual or physical abuse. It was all emotional, mental, and spiritual. So yes, having their eyes and ears open to see the truth, to realize this was a lie, this was abusive. I still love my mom, but my mom still listens to this guy, and that's not a good thing. I'm not going to listen to him either.
Yeah. Where are you at now as far as your faith? Did it ruin it? Did it make you question everything?
Yeah, good question. And I would say the short answer is I wouldn't be alive today without my faith. The long answer is I was never suicidal. I really hit rock bottom. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. And I was doubting my faith. And I was only doubting my faith because Robert was convinced I wasn't a Christian. And then, of course, he told my wife that, and she didn't believe I was a Christian. None of them did.
Yeah.
And again, one of the attributes of a cult leader is they act as a gatekeeper to God, or whatever faith that you are in. In other words, you're not really saved until Uncle Robert says you are. And I truly believed that for a time, which is a horrific lie. So my faith is what brought me out of it. The Lord was able to show me through my friends and my family, this is wrong, this is wicked. And I'm not going to go over all the theological points, but much of what he shared is just simply unbiblical.
Yeah.
And so my faith is stronger now than ever, whereas I was a shadow of a man, a shadow of myself those last few years that I was, with my wife and under his tutelage. I mean, I've never been a weaker, more doubtful, scared man than when I was under the direct, tutelage and guidance of this wicked, evil man. And in Christianity, there's the phrase that we have victory in Christ, right? Well, under Robert Booty, and I believe all cult leaders, it's the exact opposite. If you have victory, then you don't need that cult leader anymore. It's the exact opposite. You are weak. You don't know enough yet. You need to keep listening to me. And what cult leaders do is, they don't come to you and start spouting utter nonsense right away. Like Uncle Robert didn't start, right off with some really crazy ideas. And he's got a lot of them. I've only touched on a few. He would read from the Bible. So you knew the Bible really well. But then 5, 10, 15 years down the road, he would twist it so it's anything but the truth. So imagine mishitting a golf ball, right? If you mishit a golf ball by that much, 100 yards down the fairway, it's way off to the left or way off to the right. Yeah. Same thing what a cult leader does. It's exactly what Robert did.
When you talk to people, I'm sure you get many that say, I'll never get caught in that.
Right.
Not me, I'm smarter than that.
Yep.
But you seem like a smart guy.
It could happen to anybody. So, I'm a college graduate. My ex-wife got 2 master's degrees. And again, if I had not married into it, I would have never followed this guy. I mean, yeah, he's kind of eccentric, he's interesting, but after a cup of coffee in 15 minutes, you'd be like, well, he's interesting, but he's also a nut job. Yeah. It's crazy. But there's a million different ways that I guess you could get sucked into this. And we're vulnerable. People who get sucked into a cult are vulnerable. My vulnerability was I was trying to protect my marriage. That's how I was vulnerable. I had this thing that was precious to me. And if I did not somehow solve the cognitive dissonance between I love and revere and honor my wife, and this guy is crazy, but yet she loves him, how do I solve that? So I solved that by caving and becoming brainwashed.
Did it help to write the book? Again, it's called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. Did it help to kind of get that all out?
Unbelievably helpful. So during COVID, where my kids are kind of just watching videos all day, I couldn't move my fingers fast enough on the keyboard. Because, when something like this happens to you, I think the default reaction is, well, where did I go wrong? What did I screw up? What could I have done differently? And as I was able to put all the pieces together, I really kind of finally figured out what that dream was about. And I could look back and realize that as long as Uncle Robert, had that position of authority in my wife's life, our marriage was doomed. So being able to put all these pieces together, get it on paper was unbelievably therapeutic and cathartic. And so it started out as, it was like a 5-page little report almost that my attorneys had asked me to put together. Because, the attorneys got involved because of the kids. It was awful and it lasted years. It was, when did you get married, when were the kids born, etc. And that became 10 pages, that became 20, and then during the book it just exploded. Yeah. And I didn't plan on really publishing it. I had already published one book, my first novel, The Blue Team, was working on the sequel, finished the memoir, sat on it for about a year or two, and wondered whether or not I should publish it. And then I started sharing it with people, and everybody to a T said, yes, that you need to share this story for other people to read.
And you've since written more.
I have. So I've written 2 novels, The Blue Team and then Wardrobe of the Wolf, which takes place in Southeast Idaho. It's kind of a mashup of those first 2 books. And then I'm working on a 3rd. So the novel series will be a trilogy. And then, of course, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger is a memoir.
Right.
And my youngest daughter said something really cute. She said a lot of cute things, but there was another bad thing that happened after I had published the book. And she said, Dad, it's too bad you've already published your book because this should go in it. And I thought, yeah, but and people said, well, you should write, a sequel to the memoir. And I think, no, I think I'm done writing. I think I'm done writing memoirs. And it's an intense read. And I think some people have found it hard to get through. But it's honest, it's very blunt. And again, I think it's also very important because, we did not look like cult-like material.
Right.
And my closest friends and my relatives had no clue. She left me in January. I'm not a heavyset guy. I'd lost 30 pounds and I couldn't sleep. I would red puffy eyes because I'd be bawling my eyes out in the car when I'd drive to work. In September, I finally told everybody in my office what was going on. My kids had left me. I couldn't even see them. They thought I was the devil, literally. My wife left me. And I explained it all, poured my heart out to about 20 people at the office. No one knew what was going on. And I thought for sure they would know. No one knew, no one had any idea. So that was one of the most valuable lessons for me was, the guy that cuts you off on the highway or the rude grocery clerk when you check out. You have no idea what they're going through.
Yeah.
And everybody in life is either going through something really hard, has, or will. So instead of reacting in kind and getting angry back, just be kind.
Yeah. Very good, Peter. Thank you for sharing your story. Again, it's called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. You can get it on Amazon, all over the different places. And you have a website, too.
I do. It's authorpeteryoung.com, where you can kind of follow my writing. I love to tell stories all the way back to my days at Channel 8 and KIFI. And I really enjoy telling stories that have a message and a purpose. And so I really feel like that's my calling these days.
Very good. A cautionary tale to be on the lookout for cult leaders and possible cult involvement, because most cult leaders share the same traits. And this has definitely been an interesting conversation. Good seeing you. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks for watching.